Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fidelis. This is Cassie and Lauren coming to you on this beautiful January day. At least where we live, it's relatively not freezing. Right, Cassie?
Hi. Yeah, it's pretty nice here right now.
Yeah. So I know some places are a lot colder. We're so sorry. But Houston and Florida, it's not too bad. We're wearing t-shirts. Today we're going to talk about our favorite books. So it's not going to be a very theological discussion. We're just going to share what our favorite books are, and we hope that you'll share yours as well with us in the comments. We hope that you'll share our video, and let's get to it. So we didn't really pick a specific way to organize this conversation. We're just going to go through what our favorites are. So maybe you and I can just go back and forth, and you'll share one and I'll share one. How does that sound, Cassie?
Good.
Okay, great. So why don't you go ahead and start?
So actually, the book that I'm reading right now, I think that's what I'm going to start with.
I got a book.
Yeah, obviously, you can see, this is not during nap time as usual. We're coming to you from special time.
I love it. I love it. It's all good.
So we're going to have a special guest probably the whole time. But yeah, the book that I'm reading right now, it's called The Radium Girls, and it's written by Kate Moore. And it is a nonfiction book, and it's about the true story of girls that worked in the radium factories through World War I and directly after in the 20s. And they would paint watches, the numbers on the dials of watches, and they would, and the paint was radium-based, as in radiation. So, and the method that they would use to do this, that they were told to do this, Claridge, is they would use their brushes, like these little teeny tiny brushes, and they would put it in their lips to point the brushes, and they would dip it in the paint and then paint the dial, and then they would repeat. So it's lift, dip, point, and then, So they were ingesting this radium over and over again, some of them for years. And they started, a lot of them, pretty young. Like some of them were as young as 11. Most of them were around 14, 15, 16 or so. And basically, as we know now, they all got sick. And just the way that these girls, just suffered was, I'm not even through it yet, but it's a good read and it's interesting, but it's been somewhat difficult because these girls, it was manifesting in various ailments, but most often it would affect their jaw and their teeth. So their teeth would fall out, would just rot and crumble, and their jaws would get holes in them. And one of the girls, the first girl who died, the dentist just touched her jaw, and literally the entire jawbone just fell out of her mouth. And they would have back pain. The bones in their legs would shrink. So there are several of the girls so far that they have. One of their legs is 4 or 5 inches shorter than the other because the radiation was literally eating away at their bones and shrinking their bones, and hip pain. And another one of the women, she was able to get pregnant, but she kept having stillbirths, and on and on and on. And the book basically covers their fight to get justice against the radiation companies because they knew that it was harmful. And even after they had conclusive proof, you could arguably say, at the beginning they didn't really know, because at the time, radium was marketed as this wonder drug that was good for you. So you could even argue, maybe at the beginning they didn't know, but there was a point that they did. And they lied to the girls about it. They tried to cover it up. They tried to do everything they could to keep from being held responsible. And I know just from the history of it, the basic outcome, which is that these girls kept the fight going and they refused to give up, even some of them on their deathbeds. And basically it's these girls that are responsible for what we have now, that is OSHA. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Wow. That's intense.
It is. It's not, like I said, it's not an easy book to read, and that you're basically, reading about these girls suffering these just horrible, protracted, painful, diseases and then ultimately death. And there's no treatment, there's no cure. But at the same time, it's inspirational because despite what they're going through, despite all of their suffering, They refused to give up. Most of them, a lot of them were Catholic, interestingly, which I didn't know that until I started reading the book, but apparently the factories happened to be in these Catholic communities. So these girls were devout Catholics, and they didn't lose their faith, and in some cases it was the exact opposite. It made them even more devout. So it's difficult, but it's also good, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. I've never heard that story at all before. So I'm really glad that you kind of put that on our radar. That's a part of history that seems like it might have been forgotten. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
On the fiction front, since that's what we are starting with, my favorite fiction author is Michael O'Brien. He's a Canadian author who writes novels, and he's also an artist. So I kind of admire his ability to do art in different mediums. I feel like as a writer, I have a really hard time appreciating visual art. And so it's kind of mind-boggling to me that there's this incredible, I mean, he's just a master of the English language, this incredible author that also has the ability to do painting. I don't know what his style or anything is in terms of the visual art that he does, but I just think it's such a cool overlap that he has in his life. But his series is called Children of the Last Days. And basically each story, they're kind of tied together by the same theme of these are the people he writes about are individuals who went through like in extreme tribulation, but the books are not, most of them aren't associated with each other in terms of the characters or the setting. A lot of them are based in Canada or British Columbia because that's just where he's from. Two of my favorites, though, are A Cry of Stone. That one is about a young Native American girl who most of the book is based in like upstate New York and Montreal. So it's a beautiful story of this young woman suffering and how she finds God and holds on to her faith through a lot of trials. And it's kind of, you have to be able to appreciate like the beauty and sadness to appreciate Michael O'Brien's books, because they're all about redemption, but they're not like happy, feel-good endings. But you close the book just like profoundly moved, and I really appreciate his style. My other favorite one that he wrote is called Island of the World, and that is about a young man who, I'm trying to remember the setting. He grows up in Eastern Europe. I can't remember which country, but he basically gets, he's part of like a resistance movement during World War I, I think. And then he ends up in like a gulag. Maybe it's, yeah, I can't even remember the time period. It's been like 10 years since I've read it. But the main takeaway from that book is that he spends like 10 or 20 years in like a work camp. And you kind of see like Viktor Frankl's psychology at work, because he kind of chooses the way that he's going to react to the suffering and whether or not he'll hold on to his faith. And then ultimately he ends up immigrating to New York and lives out his life there. And so it's like a whole new set of struggles, but it's very beautiful the way that Michael O'Brien tells these. They're fictional stories, but he tells basically how you can live through any difficulty or time period in history and still come out at the other end a saint. And so they're like people that you look up to, even though they're fictional. And some of them are based on real people, I believe, but none of them are like exact parallels. So Michael O'Brien, Island of the World, A Cry of Stone, that whole series, Children of the Last Days, and it's published by Ignatius Press.
Sorry for, I just
No,
second there because of these two. Yeah, that sounds really interesting though. And it's Michael O'Brien.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We can link to all these too.
Okay. I guess since I just did a nonfiction, I'll do a fiction book. Another book that I just recently read, it's called Before We Were Yours. And it is a fiction book, but it draws on real history. So like the characters and everything in it are not real, but, well, most of them, the main characters. But the situation, the story, all of that is real. And Have you heard of the Tennessee Children's Home Society?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay. Well, so this was in the, Clara, you can stay right there. This was in, like the 30s and 40s, and maybe the 20s too. I can't remember how long this went on. But if you're familiar with any of in the old glamour Hollywood days, a lot of the celebrities would adopt babies. This was where they often got them from. And like Joan Crawford, her children that she adopted were through the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And why this was so notable is because these children were stolen from their parents by a woman named Georgia Tann and her network of, henchmen or whatever you want to call them. And often it was parents that were poor and didn't have the money and the resources to fight back. And these parents would be lied to. Like in the book, the children, it's from the point of view of the children. Children are taken when the mother goes to the hospital to have a baby. And so while she's in the hospital, they're taken. And they're put into this adoption home, and I mean, they're abused, and, some of them are killed. And all of this are things that really happened. But it's, again, it's of these fictional characters. And, it was very, very well written. And this particular book, it kind of jumps back and forth between current day. It jumps back and forth between current day and, back with these children that were taken. And the current day is basically the woman, the main character, she's a descendant of this family, and she's trying to discover, what happened. She's trying to investigate and find out the truth of her family tree. So what was different? Well, the book was really interesting to read, and it was definitely moving. There's no doubt about that. It was, a very moving book. And especially as a parent, because it's pretty much your worst nightmare. And in the book, the children, their father keeps on coming and trying to get them, and they try to reunite them. But the problem is that when the oldest girl has the ability to escape, if she does so, it means being further separated from her other siblings, because already they've been separated, and the ones that are still left, she doesn't want them to be further, pulled apart. So it puts, this girl, and in the book she's maybe 12 or so, in this horrible predicament, because what do? Do you go back to your father and leave your other siblings behind, or do you stay with your siblings and try to keep your family intact as much as you can? Oh, thank you. Clara just brought me this.
Aww.
By coincidence. So the difficult thing about it, though, is that I'm reading it, and I know that it's based on a real period in history that actually happened. So I would be reading it, and I would go and Google, the things that would happen to these children, and all of it is really, it's true. Even though it's a fictional story, the setting, the circumstances, all of that really happened. And authorities knew what was going on, judges and police, and a lot of times police would cooperate with her to help her steal these children. And the fact that such an injustice would go on for so long is just really horrible and heart-wrenching. And so that was another book that I read that was very good, but it's very sad. So if you want to, if you read like a sad book, that's a good one to go for. Or if you just want to kind of learn more about the history of, just kind of have an idea. This is a chapter in American history. It really happened. And a lot of these children, even once the whole scandal was kind of unexposed, like the Hollywood celebrities like Joan Crawford, they didn't return the children, once they found out they were stolen. They kept them, because why would they return them? It's really, it goes into kind of treating children, human beings, as products, as property that can be bought and sold, because that was what Georgia Tann did. She would charge these exorbitant prices. And if any of the parents, the adoptive parents, did kind of catch on that everything was on the up and up, then she would start to blackmail them and So it's just a very horrible situation. But I think it's good that people know that these things happened. I think it's important that people know that they happened, because if we don't, then, I mean, they'll keep happening.
That's interesting. I never knew about that. And I wonder if it kind of explains how Hollywood got into the business of commoditizing children, because now you have people like Sofia Vergara and Chrissy Teigen glamorizing the idea of just throwing away children they don't want. Like Chrissy Teigen did IVF, even though she's not infertile, because she wanted to, as far as I know, because she wanted to pick a girl. So they had several embryos. She picked out the girl and they threw away the rest. And she just acted like it was a wonderful thing that they were able to pick out which child they wanted. So we see that today. I wonder if this story that you're sharing is kind of the root of where that mentality came from in Hollywood. That's really sad.
I mean, I think it definitely plays a role. I think you can't get around that, because it's the same thing, even if it isn't literally, they're not stealing babies. It's the commodification of children, like you said. So that still continues to this day, which is why it's important, for us to know that these things happen.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad you mentioned that. What was the name of the book again?
Before We Were Yours.
Okay. We're going to link all these below for if you're interested in reading any of them. And we'd love to hear yours. If you want to comment with your favorite books, we would love to know what they are as well.
I just remembered that this same situation, it was just in the news. It does still happen. It just doesn't happen domestically that we know. Do you remember? It was a family that had adopted what they thought was an orphan from Africa. I can't remember which country. And it turned out that her mother was very much alive and had been told that her daughter was going to go to the United States to be educated and then brought back to her.
Oh my gosh.
And the family, when they found out, the family in the United States, they pretty much had to fight the United States government to return the child back.
Oh my gosh.
It was in the news. It was interesting that it got brought up that this happens all the time. And a lot of the families, when they find out, they don't return the children. Even though they know that this child has parents, they just keep them because it's like, well, this is my new purse that I bought.
Yeah.
It still goes on.
So a big part of our work in the pro-life movement is not just to end abortion, but to make people realize that children are not commodities, and if we don't treat them with equal value to ourselves, then we're never going to end these problems, whether it's abortion or IVF or stealing people's children from overseas. That's crazy. Yeah. But that's really good to know about. That's a good launching pad for a lot more study, I'm sure. My next books are mostly Catholic, not because this is a Catholic channel. That just happens to be what most of the books are that I have read in the past. So I'm going to mention two authors, and basically any book from these authors is awesome, but I'll mention what my favorite ones are. So Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Sheen, is he venerable or blessed now? But anyway, he's on the road to canonization. He was a bishop.
I think he's venerable.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's gotten to blessed yet.
He'll get there.
This is something with his body. They're fighting over the location of his body. Peoria wants it. New York wants to keep it in New York, and so it's like they can't move forward. Yeah, they can't move forward until they decide like where his body should go, which is, ridiculous. But. Yeah.
Well, he for anyone who doesn't know, most people watching this probably know who he is, but he was an archbishop in Illinois, and he was famous. He started off, his fame grew around the country because he had a TV show that was on every week where he used to talk to America about Catholic theology and just living a good life in general. And he gained this celebrity status. He was this incredibly dynamic and warm character that was so easy to love, no matter what your faith background was. And he just would walk. He had this like blackboard. He would stand in front of it. It was a black and white show in the early days of TV. and he would just give these lessons, and he would draw pictures of angels on the board, and then he would give people like bullet points to take with them for the rest of the week. And he was also a phenomenal writer. So his writing style it's easy to follow, and he has this amazing ability to make you, when you're reading, like you're falling in love with God while you're reading, because the way that he talks about God is so affectionate and profound that you just can't help but learn from it, but at the same time grow in your relationship with God. So reading it is kind of like a prayer, but it's not like he's writing reflections. Like he's kind of writing theology and life advice. So it's not like reading Chicken Soup for the Soul or anything, but it's just I just find him so unique, and all his books are amazing. A couple of my favorites were The World's First Love, which is about Mary. He had this profound relationship with Mary, and he just kind of communicates that and some truths about Mary in the book. It's really beautiful. He has A Life of Christ that's really good. Peace of Soul is one of my favorite books that he has, and it is what the title suggests. Like it's a whole book about how to live your life in a state of peace rather than having chaos or interior turmoil, no matter what your vocation is or anything. So really good read, especially for moms. I actually read most of his books when I was in the monastery. We used to have like a half hour of spiritual reading every day, and that's usually who I read. But I've read his books throughout the last 10 years or so, and they're really good. The other author I wanted to mention, he wrote a series of saints biographies, but he writes them in historical fiction style. So Louis de Wohl, he has a ton of saints biographies, but they're all based on the saint's life, but he does things like he adds dialogue and he says what they were thinking. So those are obviously like kind of from the fictional standpoint, but they're all rooted in this saint's life story. So he has tons. I don't even know how many there are, but they're all really good. My favorite one is The Glorious Folly, which is about St. Paul. It's an amazing story, and I would highly recommend reading that ahead of the St. Paul movie that's coming out with Jim Caviezel. I think it's coming out around Easter, but The Glorious Folly is just such a good way to get to know Paul on a personal level. Paul had he had a temper, and he had a lot of faults, and it's reading his life in the context of historical fiction just gives you so much hope as a Christian, because you kind of feel like if Paul could become a saint, and a great saint at that, like anyone can. And so that's my favorite one. But I think Louis de Wohl's most famous book is probably called The Spear. And that one is not so much a saint's biography. It's the story of Cassius, who was the centurion who, according to legend, is the centurion who pierced Jesus in the side after his death, when blood and water flowed out. So it kind of goes into it gives you a picture of how the Romans were viewing Jesus during Jesus's life and crucifixion. And so it's like another perspective on the Passion of Christ. And then it goes into, it kind of covers like early Christianity, because the legend is that Cassius converted right on the spot after he pierced Jesus in the side. And so you kind of see his struggle of like converting to Christianity, but still being a Roman centurion, and how does he reconcile those? It's been a long time since I've read it, but any of his biographies are amazing. So just if you search Louis de Wohl on Amazon, they'll all pop up. He's got one called Lay Siege to Heaven, which is about St. Catherine of Siena, and just a whole bunch. They're all really good. I think he was writing in like the 50s. So those are two authors, Fulton Sheen and Louis de Wohl, where anything that you read by them is going to be amazing. Hi.
What I'm curious, you mentioned that Fulton Sheen is especially good for moms. Why would you say that is?
So he's kind of like Saint Jose Maria, in the sense that he wanted everyone to feel like holiness was accessible. And so some writers, I feel like spiritual writers, are writing specifically like geared towards priest and religious, or they're giving suggestions that just aren't accessible to people who aren't priests and religious. Archbishop Sheen is kind of like a Catholic life coach, to where he's giving you tips on how to live your life in a state of peace, and a state of holiness, and how to get to know God and the saints in a really accessible way. So he's not like lofty. He just comes down to your level and delivers the faith in such like a personal way. I think that his personality of being so warm and relatable, it really comes through in his writing. So it's profound and deep. He doesn't try to water things down. It's not like a chicken soup for the soul, like I said, but the tips that he gives are tangible. You can actually put them to use in your life, and they help you to get to know God on such a personal level. And Fulton Sheen's relationship with God just shows so much.
Well, I've listened to some of his. I don't want to like his TV broadcasts, but you can get them as podcasts now, and so I have them in the car. But I definitely want to check out that book now.
Yes. Yeah, they're all good. He's another one where if you put his name in on Amazon, they'll all pop up, and they're all good. Like every single one of them is top notch.
Okay, well, I guess it's back to me. The next book that I recently read that I wanted to mention, it's called American Radical: Inside the World of an Undercover Muslim FBI Agent. And the book is actually written under his undercover name because he's still actively undercover. I don't know what kind of undercover work he's doing, but they can't put it under his real name, obviously. They can't compromise his identity. But the book starts out with his work as a police officer, and he was doing undercover work with drug traffickers. And then 9/11 happened, and his parents were Egyptian. He's, a Muslim, and when he saw that it was Islamic terrorists that were responsible, he talks about just this sinking feeling that he had that people were doing this horrible thing in the name of his faith. And he immediately went to the FBI and said, look, I'm Egyptian. I speak Arabic fluently. I want to help. And shockingly to me, they kind of blew him off and didn't get back to him until years and years later. And it was almost like by happenstance that he kind of stumbles across an FBI agent who says, hey, I would like for you to come and do this undercover work with me. And so he creates this persona where he is, a jihadi and has to kind of ingratiate himself with, these Islamic terrorists in a sleeper cell that is in Canada. And it was the Via Rail terrorist plot in Canada where they were the plot was to blow up a train that went from Quebec to New York. But basically the thought process there was, hey, we can strike two countries at one time with this train. And it was really interesting because he's, associating with these different terrorists, and some of them, they're all different, and that's one thing that he points out. And it really was eye-opening to me, because when you think of Islamic terrorism, even me, my husband was in the Marine Corps, he was deployed 4 times, you know that there are different factions, but it's hard to really, truly see just how splintered the movement is, which is one of the points that he makes is that there's really they're not acting in the name of Islam. All of them, it's their own, kind of personal, perversion. And as such, it's going to be different per person. Like one of the terrorists that he was, having to work with, all of his anger, his murderous rage was towards Jews. And another one, it was, all the infidels. And then another one, and one thing that was also really interesting was how difficult a time these terrorists had trying to recruit, like-minded brothers. That they even had difficulties going to mosques because your average Muslims, like this FBI agent, who were not terrorists, would be uncomfortable around these people, around the terrorists, even though no one knew at the time that they were terrorists. That still their behavior, their extremism was off-putting. Yeah. So they would have a hard time recruiting people. And so that was one of the things that he pointed out, was that a lot of these terrorists don't go to the mosque. People that are in the mosque, these are the people that are likely to be, good Muslims that aren't, violent or extremists. The people that don't go to the mosques are the ones that are more likely to be extremists. And there were a lot of emotional moments in the book too. His mother died, and that was one of the things that kind of propelled him towards being more serious about his faith. And then, this really struck me even just as, obviously it's about Muslims, but even being Catholic, it kind of touched me. And that he develops this relationship with pretty much the head of the terrorist plot. And on one hand, he's this violent, murderous, horrible person. He's a terrorist. He wants to kill as many people as he can. But on the other hand, the FBI agent is talking about the humanity that he sees in this person, the good person that's there. And that he's been radicalized, he's been perverted, but, his struggle to want to try to save him. Mm-hmm. And, can you save a person from the evil that lives inside of them? Can you get their humanity back? Mm-hmm. And so even not being Muslim, that was something that was really touching to me. And, he leaned on his father for that. And his father was the one that said, look, what he's doing is not Islam. This is not what we stand for. And there's no saving him. You just have to put that aside and do your job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get where you're coming from, but, you can't save him.
Yeah.
I could feel the conflict that he was having. And then in addition to that, the weight of having to associate with terrorists day in and day out, that's your entire life. And just the burden that it places on you. And, at one point they go to Times Square and the terrorists want to go to the 9/11 memorial. And he's sitting there saying, like, that's the last place I want to go to with these people. And just this emotional turmoil as he's sitting there, inside he's reeling, and then on the outside he's having to play along with these terrorists who are sitting there like, oh, this is amazing, look at what we did. And how he said that right then and there he had to literally fight himself tooth and nail not to kill them right there because it was so horrible.
Wow.
And so I thought it was a really good book. It was really, really good. And it was eye-opening in a lot of ways because a lot of people, I think, have these misconceptions about Muslims. And I'm not going to lie, for a long time I was one of them. But, I've kind of been able to learn more and, come around. And this book was another step in that. And I think it would go a long way if people read it too.
Yeah. To help clear up that confusion.
I'm sorry?
Just to help clear up that confusion and the conflict that people feel.
And to not see Muslims as people that you have to be afraid of. You get and he even mentions that at some point, and in a way, it's like they were almost right. But he talks about how he went on a plane, and this is after 9/11, with this wannabe terrorist. Mm-hmm. And they're both sitting there in their, he has to dress more Muslim-like, so they're wearing the clothes, and they're sitting there speaking in Arabic on the plane, and he's everyone's sitting there staring at us, and I know what they're thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I think it's hard for Americans to find the balance because we know that most Muslims, even if they're not radicals, they sympathize with radicals. So most Muslims that have been polled around the world believe that honor killings are okay in some cases, and terror is okay in some cases, but they won't themselves do it. So it's always this tension. It seems like a really relevant book that would help people to understand where the dichotomy lies. And it's called American Radical?
American Radical, yeah.
Okay.
And, one of the things we talked about that that I used to always think about, oh, well, there's Sharia law and all of this, and the honor killings and stuff that we hear about in the news. But one of the things he talks about, and I haven't read the Quran, I don't know firsthand what it says. I'm taking this guy's word at face value. Mm-hmm. But he talks about one of the teachings of Islam is that you have to abide by the rules of the country you live in. Mm-hmm. So there's no Sorry, my daughter wants to wear the Kylo Ren mask. So he's pointing out that, when these terrorists are sitting there saying, oh, well, it says this and that in the Quran, and, you should kill someone who, the honor killings or whatever, and he points out that that's not what it actually teaches, that you're supposed to abide by the rules of the country that you live in. And so it definitely cleared up misconceptions for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's helpful.
I think that it just really, I can't imagine how it must be to be a Muslim American and an FBI agent who's willing to go undercover and risk your life for people that on the whole are scared of you or hate you or are suspicious of you and are not going to be grateful at all for what you've done. And so it just speaks a lot to this person's character.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't imagine the emotional weight of maintaining your own values and your own solid foundation when you're having to spend 24/7 around people who are evil. It has to be very difficult.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great. Okay, we'll link to that one as well. American Radical. I guess I'll just mention two more. So again, I'm going to mention an author where if you read anything by him, it's amazing. His name is Brian Tracy. I don't know what his faith is. I know some Catholics that are friends with him, so he might be Catholic, I'm not sure. But he's just a self-improvement and business writer. And he has a few books that are pretty popular. Eat That Frog is one. It's really good. It's about overcoming procrastination and doing the hardest thing on your to-do list the first thing in the morning when you start work. And then a couple others that are really good are Focal Point, about just making sure that you keep your eyes on the target in terms of your goals and your objectives for your career and different facets of your life. And Goals is another one of his books, and we've mentioned that one before, and it's just about his tips for setting goals. And so he gives very clear step-by-step directions, and he'll say, he has certain parts of his books where he'll be like, now take out a piece of paper and write this at the heading and then answer these questions. And he helps you in a step-by-step process to boil down and distill what it is in your life that's most important to you and what the steps are that you need to improve in those areas or have more time with your family or make more money or whatever it might be. He just kind of gives you the step-by-step directions for that. I feel like it's really relevant to faith life because you can apply the same principles to growing closer to God. And also just, anything that's worth doing is worth doing well. And that's kind of a principle of our faith too. So anything I think that helps us to become better in our careers or our personal lives or relationships, it's all at the service of our vocation too. So Brian Tracy, anything by him. Eat That Frog. So one thing I wanted to mention is, since I became a mom, almost all my reading happens through audiobooks. So I'm actually listening to books. And one of the advantages of that for me is that I usually listen to a book like 2 or 3 times, not just once, because I'll always find things that I didn't pick up on the first time. And it's easy to do that when you're just listening to them. I rarely reread books, like physically. There are a few that I've reread, but for the most part, once I read a book, I just put it away and start another one. But when it comes to audio, I can just start it over. And Eat That Frog, Brian Tracy's book about overcoming procrastination, it's just very relevant to me. It's like my biggest struggle and something I'm really actively working on this year. And I think I've listened to Eat That Frog like 12 times. And every time I listen to it, I'm like, oh yeah, that tip and that tip. I just feel like you can apply everything in that book to life. So those are some of his books. Brian Tracy, great self-improvement writer. And I like a lot of self-improvement authors for sure, but he's one where I feel like every single thing he's written is worth reading.
What are some of the tips that he gives that are like helpful?
So for the goal setting, he goes through a step-by-step process of like identifying what's most important to you, and then breaking your goals down into categories, writing your overarching goals with your date that you want to have it done by, and then breaking up the steps that you're going to need to do and when in order to achieve that goal. So those are really applicable in terms of goal setting. In terms of overcoming procrastination, Eat That Frog, the idea, I think it came from Einstein, and it's about doing the biggest, hardest, ugliest thing on your to-do list the first thing in the day. So when you sit down to work, you know, in my case, it would be like writing is the thing that I tend to procrastinate on the most. So the first thing that I should do when I sit down to work in the morning is do the writing that I need to do that day, because everything else will be downhill from there. So for overcoming procrastination, it's about doing the hardest thing first. And then he has a bunch of really practical tips on getting to that point. So he talks about only checking your email once a day. I turned off all the notifications on my phone, even the text notifications, and I got rid of the social media platforms on my phone except Instagram, because you can't use Instagram on your desktop. So I don't get any notifications. So the onus is on me to check for those things. And eventually I want to get to where I'm only checking it once a day at like a set time. I'm not there yet at all, but turning off the notifications was a good start. He also says, and this doesn't apply to you and I because journalism and PR, you have to be on top of the news. But if you're in like sales or something, or you're a stay-at-home mom and the news stresses you out, he says, don't watch or listen to any news if you're in a profession where you don't have to for your job. He says if there's something important, someone will tell you. Another tip that he gives is about email, only checking it once a day. And he says sometimes you can just delete your whole inbox, because if something was really important, the sender will resend it. So if you're feeling like you just can't tackle your inbox, he said he doesn't like discourage people from just deleting everything, not even opening it. One thing he didn't mention, but something that's been helpful to me is in terms of maintaining the inbox, I signed up for this service called Unroll Me. And it's free, and it just, you tell it to give you a daily email, and so it's like a subscription. It sends you a daily email that has all of your other important emails inside of it. So you just get like one email a day and all the important stuff is in it. And then it also will unsubscribe you from everything that's not in that. So if you are subscribed to a bunch of spam mail that you don't want anymore, Unroll Me will get rid of all of that and just put like, so I get like the emails from my kids' school and bills and receipts and stuff like that in like one daily email that I can open whenever I want. So I'm not getting bombarded by things coming in throughout the day. So that's been helpful. Just little things like that where I feel like I didn't even realize that some of these things were sabotaging my time so much until I started to study it a little more.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty interesting thing to check out, especially like the goal setting and everything.
Yeah.
I'm not. Did you have more books to mention, or because I have?
Bible. Just try to read the Bible every day.
Okay, I have two more. The next one is a fiction, and it's called "The Life She Was Given" by Ellen Marie Wiseman. And this book is about a girl whose mother sells her to the circus in the 20s. And you spend the beginning of the book, and her mother treats her like she keeps her locked in the attic and doesn't let her ever leave her room, and is always telling her that she's a monster, she's a monster, she's a monster. And she's never seen herself. She doesn't know what she looks like, and she just assumes that her mother's right, that she's a monster. When she finally goes and is sold to the circus, and she finally sees herself and is shocked because she doesn't look like a monster, but it turns out that she is albino, and that's why her mother was so embarrassed of her. And so, she goes away to the circus, and she's has to endure, some abuses, and but Clara basically finds a way to build a life for herself, and she becomes one of the star acts in the circus, and she falls in love. And Clara. So it was really well written. It's another one of those books where it switches back and forth between the past and the present day. The present day portions were definitely like the less interesting ones. Actually, it wasn't even present day. Clara, that's enough. It took place in the 50s, and it was just that whole part could have been left out. But
Yeah.
the part from that took place during the circus and everything, that was really well written. Clara, that's enough. But it was also really, I mean, it was heartbreaking because the people that were in the circus were all of the cast-offs of society.
Yeah.
People, you know, I mean, not just like this albino girl, but anyone who doesn't fit in or who's maybe disabled or different in any way. And it's one of those things where, again, you know, we kind of think, oh, well, this happened in the past. We're so much better now. I mean, we're really not. Thank you. We're really not. I mean, the same thing goes on. Not literally people running away to the circus, but for example, this video that I just shared today from Elizabeth Warren, where she talks about, and I'm not a huge, super big fan of Elizabeth Warren, but what she's talking about is real and it happens, and it's that people with disabilities, for example, are put in factories and given jobs where they work and they get paid like pennies an hour, like 33 cents an hour. And this is something that I've known happens before this one video, but it's nice to see it having attention brought to, because again, it's exploitation, the same thing that happens in this book, and so there's relevance to today. And also how we dehumanize people, because I mean, that's something, again, like you mentioned with the pro-life movement, that's something that this book kind of goes into. How people, just if they don't fit into the box that we want them to fit into, we dehumanize them. Whether it's, you know, a preborn child or someone with a disability or someone with a birth defect or anything like that, we rob them of their humanity.
Yeah.
That was, it was a very interesting book, and then at the same time, you know, a lot of it was heartbreaking. But again, I think it had a lot of relevance to today.
Interesting.
And the last one that I wanted to mention, this was the only Catholic book that I read recently, and that's actually the one from Pope Francis, The Name of God is Mercy. And I specifically picked that because I haven't done a whole lot of like heavy lifting when it comes to Catholic reading. I haven't read anything from Fulton Sheen or, you know, St. Augustine, or, you know, I have St. Therese's book, The Story of a Soul. I have that, her autobiography, on hold to read. But so for me, you know, I wanted something that was going to be kind of easy to kind of gradually step my way into, you know, Catholic writing. And what this book is actually a series of interviews, and the journalists who published the interviews in the form of a book with Pope Francis took place over a period of time. And I appreciated how easy it was to read it. The message was, I mean, the one criticism I have is that, you know, after a while it became a little bit repetitive, but I mean, I appreciated the message. And, you know, there's this picture that a lot of Protestants or non-Catholics have of the Catholic Church, that we're just these rigid people and we think everyone is, you know, condemned to hell, or, you know, but this book is kind of an example of how none of that is true. And it's really, it's a good reminder because, you know, I think I've talked about on the, you know, on here before, that there will be times when it's like I haven't been to confession in a while, or, you know, and I'll just sit there and I'll get it into my head that I'm like, no, I'm the worst. I'm not deserving of the sacrament. I'm not deserving of any of this. And so this book is kind of a nice reminder that, you know, God is merciful. He's not hateful or spiteful or vengeful. He's merciful, and he wants to extend that mercy to you. And you just have to be the one to take the step and ask for it. And so that was, you know, I read it pretty quickly. I think it only took me like 2 days. And it was really good. It was a nice little reminder of, you know, the mercy of God.
Yeah, that one is on audiobook too. I listened to it, but I admit I was kind of half listening to it, and I wasn't paying close enough attention. Can you see me, or is my screen black?
I can. Oh,
I don't know. It looks black on my end, so I just wanted to let everybody know that if that's the case, I'm sorry. Really quickly, I just wanted to run through April asked if we had any suggestions for teenage boys, and I have a few that I'll just list off the authors. So obviously J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, especially his Narnia series. Louis Theroux's books are actually great for teenagers. I read almost all of them when I was a teenager. The Glorious Folly that I mentioned about St. Paul would be great for a teenage boy. G.K. Chesterton, and I think he has a series that was kind of aimed at teenage boys. I think it's the Father Brown series, but I could be mixing that up with someone else. But G.K. Chesterton is great if your kid is into that style of writing. The Grunt Padre is a book. I don't know who it's by, but it's about like a priest in the military who basically died saving people. Yeah, I think he died on the battlefield, like giving last rites to soldiers during a battle. And it was not that long ago. So that's a really good one for a teenage boy. Murder in the Cathedral. The name just escaped me, but it's a famous poet and playwright who wrote it. I don't remember. But it's about the martyrdom of Thomas à Kempis. So just kind of like badass saint stories. A Man for All Seasons, Thomas More, who was a martyr lawyer, also would be a good one. So those are just a few I wanted to mention because someone asked that specifically.
Harry Potter. I'm a Harry Potter fangirl, but but they're really good. I mean, they're good for both boys and girls, but I mean, boys especially, you know, it's got a lot of good male role models as well as good female role models, but just in general, good male role models, and the themes of it, of good versus evil, and, you know, love beating evil, or just the power of love and family, and standing up for what you believe in, and, you know, family. It's great. I would highly recommend that for a teenage boy if they have.
That's a good suggestion. And for a movie, I actually saw the movie. It was amazing. Called I think it's called Silence.
Yeah. There's a book.
Spider-Man and Kylo Ren. I don't know anyone's actual names, but
I got the book from the library and I started to read it while I was pregnant, and I think I got one chapter in and I'm like, nope, I'm too hormonal for this. I cannot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's intense, but it's so well done. It's done by, I forgot the filmmaker's name. He's a famous
Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, yes. I don't know, I'm so bad with movies, but that would be
a lot of like criticism that it was, you know, blasphemous or heretical or something.
No, it's not. It's so good. And it would be, I'm going to make all my boys watch it. I have 3 boys. When they're teenagers, that's going to be mandatory viewing because it's incredible. I would recommend that.
Yeah.
Like it's based on a true story. They changed the names of the movie, I think. Not 100% sure. But yeah, all that really happens with the priests and the martyrs, the Japanese martyrs and everything.
Yep. And it's, I mean, just cinematically, it's so well done. The story is amazing. It's very well written. It's incredible casting, really good acting. And just, I have a hard time like focusing on movies sometimes. Like a lot of times I'll just get up halfway through and start doing something and then lose my train of thought. I like didn't even go to the bathroom when I was watching this movie. I sat there and was just like enraptured. It is so good. So I highly recommend that, especially for a boy. Yeah. Any other last thoughts, Cassie?
No, but you know, I definitely have lots of books that I like to read.
Yeah. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, and like I said, I still have Story of a Soul that's on hold, and Dorothy Day's autobiography. I can't remember.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I have stuff that's on hold that I have to still get around to reading and just haven't been able to because I don't want to go. I do read books multiple times, but I don't want to buy a book until I know that I like it.
Yeah.
And so I get them from the library a lot, which means I have to wait for it to become available.
Yeah.
And it hampers my ability to read them quickly.
Yeah. I don't read books over again very often. If it's a really good one, I will. But yeah, the audiobooks, you can do Libby. The Libby app it connects to your library card and it lets you check out books that you can read on your phone or your device, or it's got tons of audiobooks. So that's where I've been. It's basically like audible.com, but it's free because it's your library. So you might have to put the book on hold, but eventually you'll get it and it'll be free. So that's what I've been using.
I actually just thought of another good book for boys too, and I haven't read it yet. I have it from the library and it's on my list, and it's very highly rated, so hopefully this is a good book to recommend. But it's called Endurance, and it's by Scott Kelly, and he's an astronaut. I've read an excerpt from it, and that excerpt was good. But it's about his life as he spent the most time in space ever.
Oh, wow.
He lived a year on the International Space Station, and one of the things that got me interested in the book was in this excerpt, it talks about all of the physical ailments that he has now, because that year in space fundamentally changed his body, and, so that's one I'm very interested to read, and I bet a boy would enjoy that as well.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone else has boy suggestions, feel free to recommend them, because I've got 3, you've got 2, 3, you have 3 boys or 2?
Okay, 2 boys.
2 boys, yeah. So we'll put them to good use. All right, everybody, that was a good conversation. We'll have to do this again because I think we could talk about books for like 3 days straight. And maybe we'll do one on movies at some point too. But if you have any recommendations, please share them with us in the comments, and go like our Twitter feed, which Cassie's doing a great job keeping updated. And that is at Fidelis Women on Twitter. So we will talk to you again next week or the week after. I'll be at the March for Life, so either Cassie will interview somebody next week or we will skip it and just talk to you in 2 weeks. But either way, thank you for joining us today, and we will talk to you next time.